On the 11th of December 1282, the Kingdom of England would write their final page on their centuries-long conquest of their western neighbour, Wales. The Battle of Orewin Bridge was a fittingly dramatic end to what could be argued to be nearly 700 years of warfare, and the extinction of a royal dynasty that traced its origins all the way back to the fall of Roman Britain. The leader of the Welsh, Llywelyn II, had travelled down to Builth to talk with local English leaders who had promised to assist him in his campaign, and he soon left his army to meet these marcher lords. His men, 7,160 strong, stood guard at the bridge over the River Orewin. However, disaster would soon strike, as the English had learnt of Llywelyn's plans, and now 6,300 enemy soldiers had approached on the opposite bank. The Welsh were leaderless, yet in a strong defensive position. But luck would not be on their side today, as a local scoundrel, somehow breaching the language gap with the Anglo-Norman commanders, informed the English of a ford downstream that would allow them to safely divert the bridge. The English humbly took this suggestion and sent most of their archers across to attack their enemy. The entire Welsh army then swiveled around, facing away from the bridge, and attempted to strike back at the archers, leaving their flank wide open. The English knights then raced across, ploughing into the now rotated Welsh forces, routing them, and resulting in around 2,000 casualties. A disaster. Llywelyn, meanwhile, was still away from the battlefield, only coming back once the Welsh had been routed. But before he could return to the battle that had already been lost, an English knight named Stephen spotted him and cut him down. Llywelyn is commonly nicknamed the last Prince of Wales, as he was the second to last of his line to ever hold the title, and following his death, the conquest of Wales would be completed by 1283. This would forever cement the Battle of Orewin Bridge in the annals of history, the last dramatic destruction of the Prince of Wales. Except, something's wrong here. Something's very, very wrong. This is how a hoax on Wikipedia changed a country's history and tricked hundreds of thousands of people. It all started in 2023. I had heard of the Battle of Orewin Bridge before. By all accounts, it was one of the most important events in my country's history, but I found one thing about this conflict really abnormal. All of the coverage and descriptions were really detailed. Excessively detailed, almost too detailed. Of course, detailed descriptions of medieval battles do exist, but they aren't very common, and especially not in medieval Wales. None of the other battles from this time have such exhaustive descriptions. In fact, none of the battles ever mentioned in all of Welsh history have anything close to this. Most of the time, they just look like this. 817, Battle of Llanfaes. But this had everything. Complex troop maneuvers, army compositions, detailed descriptions of the battlefield, the actions taken by both sides, and troop numbers down to the hundreds and tens. This was fascinating and I had to learn more. But when I went to check just one medieval source on this, the Chronicle of the Princes, Brut y Tywysogion, I found something strange. Or rather, I didn't, because I didn't find anything like this battle at all. Instead, the Welsh source on this apparent colossal and detailed conflict just said that Llywelyn came down to a village named Llanganten near Builth, that he stayed with his army and sent other men out to meet with the local leaders, and was apparently then attacked by 2 English lords, and subsequently slain along with his foremost men. No troop numbers, no army composition, no complex maneuvers, and no bridge crossing. In fact, there was no bridge, and the nearby river Irvon, Orewin in English, isn't even mentioned. Also, in all honesty, there isn't really even a mention of a great battle. According to the historian Carrie Mound, this medieval source just claims that Llywelyn was slain with his foremost men. You might think that surely the rest of the army's just implied, but another memory of mine jumped out here. Llywelyn's eulogy. Because this eulogy has a very interesting detail for us today, as within its author famously laments the Lladd y Deunaw, the death of the 18. I might have been kicked out of top set maths, but even I'm pretty sure that that is less than 2,000. What was going on here? Well, despite the lack of citations throughout the article, its wholesale disagreement with the Welsh manuscripts, and the glaring citations needed at the top of the page, there was actually a source. Famous Welsh Battles by Philip Warner, 1977. This was the source presumably for the entire page, as there weren't any citations or page numbers. Fortunately, I'd learnt to read about 62 years ago, so I was able to find the right page pretty quickly. If we look inside, we can see that the broad strokes are largely the same. Llywelyn came to the River Orewin, left his army, which promptly abandoned their defensive positions to fight some archers, and were resoundingly pummeled by English knights. However, what's really interesting is where the article diverts from its only listed source. On the Wikipedia page, the Welsh had an incredibly specific force of 7,160 men, yet Warner claims Llywelyn arrived with a force of less than 1,000, and never estimates the size of the English army. He also states that Llywelyn was gone for quite some time, as we're told that the whole archers crossing the ford business took place overnight, and that Llywelyn's slayer was an English knight named Adam, which apparently some chroniclers call Stephen. Well, which one is it? There's a larger issue at hand, however, as the number of discrepancies suggest there is another source buried here somewhere. Also, Warner doesn't actually say what his source was. So really, all we know now is that at least most of the article can be attributed to a source. What exactly that source is, we still don't know. If we decide to peruse the talk page, we can see that several people had noticed this before. There is only one subheading here, unreferenced, added 4 years after the article's creation. The user states that the sole reference given is a book by Mr. Warner, which must not be considered serious historical research. And we then have a surprise appearance from the original author of the article, who agrees with them. In fact, they bring up something pretty interesting. Over the preceding 4 years, the article had actively been getting worse. Several elements such as the troop numbers were never mentioned by their source, which we also discovered a minute ago, and had been tacked on with no source at all. The original page still relied on an unsourced account from a book published nearly 50 years ago, but those unfathomably specific troop numbers? They were added in December 2008. The strange disagreement over who killed Llywelyn, the current article's Stephen or the source's Adam? The original page claimed it was Adam, like Warner, but back on the 13th of March 2006 at 5:23 PM, the page was updated with an unconfident Stephen? 2 minutes later, the author seems to have reassured themselves, wiping Adam from the article entirely for the rest of time. Neither of these users had accounts, and for both of them this page was pretty much the only thing they had ever edited. It was like the original author had angered some very up-to-date deity, who then sent 2 spirits to tarnish their crops, in this case the Wikipedia article they wrote. Regardless of this, the author encouraged others to edit the page, and between the 30th of September and the 8th of October 2009, 5 users emerged trying to find information, and aimed to edit the article accordingly. If I get the chance, I shall do some research on the subject. I'll see what I can do. So full of hope, of action, of purpose. But that's not what happened. This article is still practically exactly the same as it was 17 years ago, and to add to the confusion, I found something very unusual and honestly kind of strange. Every single one of those accounts have been inactive since October 2009, when the discussion came to a close. 3 of them stopped posting before the discussion had finished, and for some, this talk page was the last place they ever edited. 2 years ago, 14 years after anyone had said anything on this page at all, another user chimed in. Has anyone been able to find good sources on this battle? Seemingly unaware that they were talking to a graveyard. It's been 2 years since I first started trying to answer these questions, trying to figure out what exactly was the source for these claims. Why were they so detailed? Why did they differ so much from the Welsh accounts? And what really happened on that fateful day in 1282? I figured there'd be no better place to start than Llywelyn's own biography, written by the historian J. Beverley Smith, and sure enough, the contents of a mere 7 pages upturned this entire thing. Beverley Smith mentions the details of Bruta Torresogion that I covered previously, noting that, thanks to the lack of detail, any information from this battle will have to come from somewhere else, somewhere you might find quite surprising. English sources. There are actually several on this battle, with one in particular standing out, although not for a good reason. Meet Walter of Guisborough, a monk in the north of England, and the apparent author of our mysteriously detailed source, which, according to Beverley Smith, was written sometime around 1300. Walter relays essentially all the information that we've already seen. The Welsh block the bridge, the English get told of a ford, they cross and defeat them. He calls the river Irvon the Orewin, which is where the English name comes from, and he also claims that Llywelyn was killed by a man named Stephen, so the Adam lovers among you are currently down by 1 point. That also means, if I'm reading this right, that Warner's claim that Llywelyn's slayer is called Stephen by some chroniclers is referring to his primary and possibly only source. But why would a random northern monk write about this? Well, the historian Llynos Beverley Smith noted that, despite being so far from Wales, Walter could have had access to some information from there. A local landowner took part in an earlier battle in North Wales, and Welsh troops used by the King of England and Scotland could have passed information on too. Unfortunately though, as we've seen, Walter's account seems to disagree with the Welsh source. They don't mention a bridge, a daring crossing, or really any of his details, except for sharing a roughly similar location, and the concept of some sort of fight happening. Although the Welsh death of the 18 or of the foremost men also seems to disagree with this picture of a grand battle between thousands, and to add to these, we have several more accounts, all from England. I won't lead you on here, none of these are perfect, and they all disagree with each other in different ways, but if we compare what they all say, then we might be able to obtain some common details. To start, everyone agrees that Llywelyn died, and that he died somewhere near Builth in Wales. Walter is the only one to specify the nearby river along with his best attempt to spell it, and the Brit is the most specific, pinpointing the village of Llanganten nearby. The next step is the why. The Welsh source relays that Llywelyn apparently took a small army with him to Builth, which he then sent away to meet with the local garrison. But several English chronicles claim that he came to meet with the men of the recently deceased Roger Mortimer, a local marcher lord. What happened next is much more confusing. Walter, as we've seen, had a grand, detailed description of a battle which no one else ever mentions, but some do talk about a conflict. Walter claims that Llywelyn was killed away from his army, while the Welsh source seems to claim he died in combat with his men. Another chronicle claims he was pursued and killed in the woods after his army was defeated, while another says he finally fell late in the day after a long battle with heavy casualties. Several of these sources, however, don't precede Llywelyn's death with a battle, but rather an ambush, with the English king's armies or the men of the Marcher Lords catching them off guard. So, looking at all of these sources, we can see that actually, it's very simple. Llywelyn came down to Builth, specifically Llanganten or an unknown bridge on the River Irfon, to meet either with the men of the nearby castle or with the local successors of the newly deceased Marcher Lord, possibly on invitation. He was then caught off guard, either fighting a colossal battle or a small ambush, dying either amongst his army or among a small group of men, either after being separated or just because that's who came with him. He may also have been executed, either by a knight named Stephen, who we've already met, or as named by one source, a man named Robert. So again, Adam fans, you're down like 5 points by now. So that's it then. We have a bunch of sources, one from Wales and several from England, all of which tell different tales, sometimes completely different tales. Walter of Guisborough has clearly won out overall, probably because it's the most complete description of a battle, despite how unverifiable it is and how much it disagrees with the local sources, and how it's the only source to ever mention any of these details, making it at the very least a text we have to be very cautious about citing. Despite this, it's on the Wikipedia article, and it's spread across the whole internet, even making it onto YouTube. The comments on here are great, all of these mentions of other bridge battles. It's kind of funny actually, because a lot of them mention Stirling Bridge, another famous bridge battle up in Scotland. It was in the movie Braveheart, apparently without a bridge, and they're right. This battle really is quite similar to Walter's description of what happened here in Wales. Here, the English approach their enemy, who are guarding the bridge across the river. They're told of a ford downstream which would make it easier to cross, and they turn it down, ultimately losing the battle. That's a fun coincidence, and one that a few people have noticed before, and I think it just goes to show how weird history can be. And hang on a second. What are you doing here? J. Beverley Smith, whilst he acknowledges that Walter and the Welsh sources do have a few key similarities, also pointed out two things that, like I said, disrupted everything. Walter is not just the only source to ever mention this whole bridge battle ford crossing business, but he's also mentioned something exactly like this before. This is Stirling Bridge, the site of a famous conflict between the English and the Scottish, and it was chronicled by Walter of Guisborough, likely very soon after it happened, and his description is very disturbing. According to Guisborough, at Stirling, the English met a bridge, were told about a secret crossing, turned it down, and lost. And according to Guisborough, and only Guisborough, at the Orewin, the English met a bridge, were told about a secret crossing, accepted it, and won. Walter, why does your account of Orewin Bridge disagree with the Welsh source, contain a description of a battle that no one else has ever mentioned, and sound exactly like a fan-fiction retelling of what would have been one of England's most important defeats at the time of your chronicle? Beverley Smith notes simply that because of how similar these two stories are, and how close Walter was writing to the date and location of the Battle of Stirling Bridge, we should treat his version of Orewin Bridge with, quote, great caution. Despite this, despite the criticisms of Guisborough over the past several decades, his story is the progenitor for all of this. For all of the descriptions of the Battle of Orewin Bridge that you can see online, for the Wikipedia article and for the book it originally cited. The events of this day are extremely confusing, obviously. The historian J. Beverley Smith stated that we may never know what happened. All we can say for certain is that Llywelyn II is dead, and that he probably died on the 11th of December 1282, somewhere around Llanganten. But the what, why and how will probably remain a mystery forever. The Welsh source is not fully reliable. It strangely claims that Llywelyn sent his men away to meet with the local lords instead of going himself, a detail unique to this source. It also doesn't mention a great battle, but instead a seemingly small ambush where Llywelyn died in combat, not after being separated like many English sources claim, which begs the question, where did they get all this from? We don't know. All we do know is that, despite all of these accounts, the only one to have ever gained and regained major fame was the worst possible one, Walter of Guisborough's retelling of the Battle of Stirling Bridge, transplanted 15 years into the past and 275 miles south to the River Orewin in Wales. The events of this day, as told by this article and various other articles and videos across the internet, in published books both from only a few decades ago and in important historical works from the 20th century, are all based on the description given by this man, Walter of Guisborough. A man who described a battle that no source has ever corroborated, in a location never before mentioned, with a conclusion that disagrees with his contemporaries both in and outside of Wales. In fact, the only source that Walter's Battle of Orewin Bridge ever had anything in common with was his own description of the Battle of Stirling Bridge. It appears that Walter wrote a description of the final dramatic battle for Welsh independence, of the end of nearly 700 years of conflict, of the demise of a royal dynasty that had traced its origins back to the end of the Roman Empire, and based it all on a retelling of what the English should have done in Scotland. Walter and his hoax have, in essence, changed a country's history, and this isn't some modern phenomenon, it had already happened before this article was written. Prominent 20th century historian J.E. Lloyd included Walter's account in his extremely influential book A History of Wales, describing how Llywelyn was cut down by Stephen de Francton away from the battle, while his men fought on the banks of the Irvine. So Adam fans, at this point, it's just over. This story was also beautifully retold in 1905 in the popular book Flame Bearers of Welsh History, which combines details from Walter and the Welsh source. Here, Llywelyn and his 18 men flee an English ambush and guard the bridge at the River Orewin while Llywelyn sleeps. The English arrive and charge but are repelled. Llywelyn's steward wakes him, and he remarks that if his men guard the bridge, then he does not care if the whole of England were on the other side. Ultimately, however, the story ends the same. By the 1980s, this account had been criticised, it disagreed with the other chronicles and the Welsh source, and it was a blatant retelling of Stirling Bridge. But ultimately, this didn't matter. It made it into Warner's book in 1977, and subsequently onto Wikipedia in 2006. It even featured on its front page. The original editor, of course, didn't know that this was a hoax. They were just recounting something from a source and were happy for people to edit the page. No one's at fault here, this is just how Wikipedia works. For community moderation, you need that community to exist. You need people who are knowledgeable to correct this page. It's just that there aren't very many of those people for Wales, especially medieval Wales, especially one single battle in medieval Wales. Consequently, this hoax eventually spread to the entire internet and has essentially changed a country's history. If you Google Orewin Bridge, if you see someone post about it, if you watch a video on it, you aren't going to see this journal from 1982 come up. You aren't going to find J. Beverley Smith's chapter covering the death of Llywelyn. You're going to find this, a hoax, a fan fiction retelling of an important English defeat, of an entirely different battle from the other side of the country. No one is at fault here except maybe for Walter. The people who wrote this article in 2006 didn't envision this narrative completely taking over. This is how Wikipedia is supposed to work. People can spot errors and correct them. But the thing is, we don't need 5 people, we need 500, 5,000. And hopefully after making this video, that's really the whole point and has always been the point of me criticizing articles like these. This hoax had a new lease of life on Wikipedia, and over the past 20 years has spread all over the internet. But hopefully now, after today, we can finally kill this myth for good. It may have taken me 2 years and my own hiatus, but thank you for sticking around. If you want more Cambrian Chronicles, I have a second channel now where I post videos that don't quite fit the fully historical premise. If you're interested, the end card on the left will take you to that. But regardless, thank you for watching.